Shabbat Shalom. This is the Shabbat known as Devarim Chazon, the Shabbat of vision. And it is so that Isaiah's vision is a haunting and terrible one. He reaches for good and he finds some, but this is our time of year when we are in a place of painful, frightening visions. And sometimes in our lives, even in this day, we have visions that come to haunt us, that pull up a chair and sit down in our hearts, whether we want them to or not. This happened to me just a couple of weeks ago, and I want to give a disclaimer at this point that, as if the words of Isaiah and Lamentations coming in a few days weren't hard enough, there will be some descriptions in this Drash that may be very difficult to hear if the words are unfamiliar to you. So a little disclaimer. Over the last couple of weeks, an editorial by Kareem Abdul-Jabbar has been making the rounds virally and in person. Kareem, who feels like a family member to many of us, particularly we Bruins, Kareem has been a real voice of reason and sensitivity in this time, speaking out and writing against expressions of anti-Semitism that have been prevalent in sports and in media, really calling out friends and colleagues of his who have spoken in unacceptable terms about Jewish people. There is much about Kareem that I could share here, but among them is that his father, Ferdinand Alcindor, was a soldier in World War II, and a family friend who was considered an uncle was a member of the all-Black unit that had a very large hand in liberating the Dachau concentration camp. In Kareem's recent and widely read piece, he referenced a song that I will admit before God and all of you, I did not know. It is called Strange Fruit. And some of you may know it well, but it has brought to mind visions and images that are really staying with me. It was made famous by none other than the incomparable Billie Holiday, Lady Day. And to watch footage of her singing this song, which she did in defiance of some local ordinances and knowing that it was enormously controversial. She sang it for the last 20 years of her much too short life. And it is thought that part of her singing of this song with the conviction and the passion with which she did may have hastened, or maybe, as some have posited, even caused her terribly early death. There was enormous controversy about playing the song on the radio, but ultimately it was a million seller, enormous at the time. It is perhaps her most iconic song. And in 1999, Time magazine named it the Song of the Century. Southern trees bear a strange fruit, blood on the leaves and blood at the root. Black bodies swinging in the southern breeze, strange fruit hanging from the poplar trees. Pastoral scene of the gallant South, the bulging eyes and the twisted mouth. Scent of magnolia, sweet and fresh, and the sudden smell of burning flesh. Here is a fruit for the crows to pluck, for the rain to wither, for the wind to suck, for the sun to rot, for the tree to drop. Here is a strange and bitter crop. This haunting protest against the inhumanity of racism and, of course, the practice of lynching stays with the soul. It does not leave. And many people know that the man who wrote the song was inspired by a photograph of a lynching in the 1930s. But the man behind Strange Fruit was a Jewish man named Abel Meeropol. He went to DeWitt Clinton High School, a public high school in the Bronx with an astonishing number of famous people among its alumni, including James Baldwin, Richard Rodgers, Burt Lancaster, Stan Lee, Neil Simon, Richard Avedon, and Ralph Lauren. Meeropol graduated from DeWitt Clinton in 1921, and he went on to teach English there for 17 years. In the late 1930s, Meeropol saw a photograph of a lynching, and it put him over the edge. He said it haunted him for days. He played it for a New York club owner after he wrote this poem and set it to music, and the New York nightclub owner gave it to Billie Holiday. Abel Meeropol was an extraordinary man. So many extraordinary people associated with this song, I can't count them. But among Meeropol's perhaps unsung actions, in addition to writing this extraordinary song, he and his wife adopted Robert and Michael Rosenberg. When they were adopted, they were 6 and 10 respectively, and Robert and Michael Rosenberg were the sons of Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, the spies who were executed for spying for the United States and for the Soviet Union. Meeropol, who was for a long time a member of the Communist Party, eventually disavowed them, went on to live a long life, and his sons, who were the sons of Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, have gone on to live productive lives and be involved in many social causes. The words of Strange Fruit have put their hooks into my heart, and I don't want them to leave. We are at a crossroads. Moses begins his farewell address and reminds the Jewish people of their failure when word was brought of the new land and fruit was brought to them to show them how good this new land was. As we hear the words of Isaiah, though, we remember what ultimately transpired in the land and how the Jewish people were sent weeping into exile, with Jerusalem utterly laid waste. Moses reminds the people of the episode of the spies, which resulted in the old guard having to die off in the wilderness and the rest of the flock having to pasture their flock for the proverbial 40 years before they could enter the land. But part of the story in Shlach Lecha in the book of Numbers, and even here, although it gets but a brief mention in Deuteronomy, is this notion of the fruit. In the book of Numbers, it's described as huge, almost unnatural. It takes multiple men to carry it. It is a strange fruit indeed. Something about that fruit was frightening to the people. It didn't beckon them forward, but actually seemed to repulse them somehow. Its existence reinforced the idea that they couldn't, nay, that they shouldn't, go there. The seemingly unbridgeable divides that keep us from going where we need to go but don't want to are often made so much worse because what we think we're seeing, we're really not. In this time, this moment in history, so many of our long-held assumptions are being challenged, broken down utterly. We're forcing ourselves, though, and we're being forced to read and to listen and to talk about subjects like white fragility and systemic racism that were, until recently, considered such taboo topics that most of us simply could not go there. There are moments of hope and brightness and light, the likes of which Isaiah gives us just a little taste, though he is still sitting, particularly at the beginning of his beautiful prophecy, in a place of deep darkness, of deep fear and sadness. But like Isaiah, and like we are called upon to do, particularly in these next few weeks when we, God willing, will pass Tisha B'Av and begin the spiritual ascent to the high holidays, we must and can take hope and comfort from those who are blazing the trails, who aren't afraid like Isaiah, like Abel Maripol, like Billie Holiday, like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, like Robin DiAngelo, to tell it like it is, to force us to look at this strange fruit, even take a bite of it, and decide what lessons we're going to take away. May that fruit not be forever a bitter crop. May it ultimately yield sweetness and sustenance, from which we may begin to heal the gaping wounds in this country, and out of which may we build a better world. Shabbat Shalom.